In today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys how you can build out your own horror map in Roblox Studio. Now, if you followed along with the previous tutorial, you already have most of your horror game planned out, and that's pretty great. And in there, you should have made some sort of map layout or map design. It could have been very simple or even very complex. This is the one that I made. I'll show you right now. My horror game is going to be taking place outside. However, yours may take place inside, and that is perfectly fine. For me, I've got some trees over here, a path, a nice grassy terrain, some rocks, some tents, and a campfire. And this is just a very basic idea, but I think it's going to do nicely for my own horror game. So first things first, we want to kind of go out and build whatever our map design is going to look like. For me, I'm going to be using terrain, so I'm using the terrain editor right here. However, you may use parts, and that is perfectly fine. So I've just got some basic terrain going on right here. A cool tip that I have for you guys, if you go over to the avatar tab on the top and then open up the rig builder and then add in your own block avatar right here, you can get a pretty good size reference for how big you want your map to be. This is looking pretty good for me. I want the player to kind of be able to walk along the path first and then they get to their campsite over here. Keep in mind the ultimate sizing of everything around you. Alrighty, so here I've got just a very base foundation for what I want my build to look like. I'm not sure why the texture for the rocks aren't loading in, but I'm sure that'll load eventually. So anyways, for the most part, I just have this long path that the player's gonna have to walk down, and over here I have the area for the campsite. Now, a few tips I want to give you guys, that if you are working with terrain, inside of the workspace you can find a terrain button right here, and this can change literally everything about the terrain. Like if you want to change the grass length, you can go shorter. You can go really tall if you wanted to. You can even change the material colors. So if you want the grass to be, I don't know, maybe more of a duller color, a darker color even. I'm actually going to make mine a little bit more of a darker green, sort of like this. And the leafy grass, I'm going to make this sort of more of a darker brown even. Maybe something like this. And that looks pretty good. So yeah, that's my first tip. Mess around with the colors of your build. Now, once again, if your guys' build is staged outside, Roblox does happen to have their very own forest texture pack and asset pack, I mean to say, that is very good. It's free if you want to get it. The link will be down in the description below. It comes with all of these assets right here: rocks, trees, flowers, even all sorts of different animals too, which is pretty cool. And all of this is completely free to use. Got some info for you here. Once again, the link will be down in the description below. Now, normally I wouldn't recommend using this. I do prefer making your own assets, but for the sake of this tutorial and for the sake of learning, it is completely justified. So feel free to do that. Alrighty guys, so I just kind of skipped past the time lapse because this was a little bit boring, I'll admit that. But at this point we've got a lot of trees going on, a big forest. I just got some simple decorations going on, and ultimately it's looking pretty good, I'd say. As I said, my first tip was just to look out for the colors of your environment, make sure everything looks nice. And my second tip is actually going to be lighting. Now, lighting is going to be completely different for every single game. But for horror games, I'll tell you that you want it to be much more desaturated and much darker. So for me, I'm just going to go through and change the lighting up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of a lot of the things inside of here because I'm going to be adding my own stuff here. For the ambient, I'm only going to make this a little bit darker. It doesn't need to be perfect at all. For the brightness, I'll leave that at 3. The color shifts, I'll leave at just like that as usual. For the specular scale, I will bring this down a little bit just to make everything appear a little less rough. Or a little more rough, I mean to say. I am going to bump the outdoor ambient up to a much lighter gray a little bit, just simply because of how much we're outdoors. I'm going to bump this up quite a bit, actually. For the shadow softness, I'm going to put this at 0.1 so we get some nice crisp shadows going on. I'm going to change the technology to future. because future is a much more realistic lighting. After that, I'm going to change the clock time down to 14 and the geographic latitude down to 40. They'll just change the way that the sun is positioned in the sky. And ultimately, I'm probably going to change the clock time so that way it's nighttime, in all honesty. So we'll leave that at 0, I guess. Here's where the fun part is. You just really like to mess around with how you want your game to look. I'm probably going to set this at like 90, in all honesty. So we get the moon in the background, but maybe like 80. There we go. Yeah, 80 is looking pretty good, I think. Now, the thing about lighting, it is trial and error, so ultimately what looks best for your game is going to look the absolute best. For some exposure compensation, I'm going to put this on about 0.3 just for that little extra boost. And the fog, I'm going to make this black, and then the fog end, I'm going to bump this down to, let's see, probably 2500. That looks pretty good. I may even go down to something as simple as 1000 just for like very dark edges. Let's see how 750 looks. It's looking pretty good there. I may even go down to 400. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Inside of the lighting, I'm going to add in something called a color correction effect. This thing has several settings for like brightness, contrast, saturation, all sorts of stuff like that. So for the contrast, I'm actually going to bump this up to 0.1. I'm going to put the saturation down to negative 0.4. And yeah, that contrast, it is a little bit too much. So I'm going to go for 0.5 instead. Actually, I don't know. I think I actually really like 0.1. I'm going to leave it at 0.1. And for the tint color, you can mess around with this. I'm probably not going to change it in all honesty. Maybe make it like a little bit more of a bluish color because it's nighttime. Yeah, I'll just go for some sort of color like this actually. This is looking really good. After that, I'm going to go ahead and add in a blur effect. Now when you add in a blur effect, it's going to be really blurry to start off with, but we can change that. For me, I'm just going to set the size from 24 down to 4. It gives everything sort of like this softer look, and in my opinion makes it look much more realistic. After that, I'm going to add something called a depth of field effect, which basically determines how blurry certain things are the farther away it gets. Like right now, my screen's all blurry again, but that's alright because we're going to change it. For the far intensity, I'm going to put this at something like 0.2. The focus distance is going to stay at there, but the in focus radius I'm going to move up to 20. And the near intensity I'm also going to leave at 0.75. Now once again, if at any time you don't think this lighting is looking good for your game, feel free to mess around, change it around however you want to. It really is trial and error, and it really is unique to every single game. Another thing I think will look good is a bloom effect, which will look good once we have some sort of lighting in here, which is bound to happen somewhere along the horror series, whether that be with a monster or anything like that, and the bloom will really just make all lighting look much better. I'm going to put the intensity at 0.5 and the size at 56. After that, the threshold I'm going to put for 2.5, and that should be alright. Alrighty, so now we've got the lighting taken care of, we have our build taken care of. I want to show you guys a few different lights that you can use inside of your game, because you don't want your horror game to be so completely dark that nobody can see anything. So I'm just going to add in a part right here. I'm going to put in the middle of my walkway right here. And inside of here, I'm going to put in a point light. Now a point light, you'll notice that kind of gives off light all around this part right here. And it goes in a radius like that. You can turn shadows on too if you'd like to. You can see how it affects the grass here, which is pretty epic. You can change the color of this if you'd like to, whether you want it to be red, blue, green, whatever. I'm just going to leave it at white though. You can change the brightness. I'm personally going to put this at about maybe 0.2 or so, and the range maybe at like, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 even. And then you pretty much just move these around just to create a little bit of lighting to certain areas that you want the player to be able to see. Because ultimately, you want to create a pathway for the player that will naturally guide them, so that way you don't have to use cartoony things like arrows or just unrealistic things that wouldn't be out here in the middle of a forest. However, if you're building an inside game, you'd probably want to have some sort of lights on the ceiling just to give the player a little bit of light. Now, if you don't want to use a point light, you definitely can use something called a surface light as well, which you'll notice it goes directly on the face of the part and goes outwards like this. I'm going to put this on the bottom face right here. And it's just interesting to see how all the different lights work. This one's a surface light, there's a point light, there's also a spotlight. So spotlight, you'll notice it's kind of like the surface light, but it's in a circle instead of a rectangle, or the size of the surface, I mean. If we put this on the bottom, you can see you have much more of a spotlight type of light. So you can feel free to highlight certain objects with these lights if you'd like to. I think it's personally unnecessary, as we are going to be making a flashlight in the next few episodes. Now guys, another cool thing I want to show you is how you can import custom textures and materials inside of your game here. Now this is incredibly useful for when you make super hyper realistic builds for your horror game, and I figured I'd let you know. So for me, I like to personally use a website called Polyhaven. This is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form. It's simply a public 3D asset library, as you can see right here, and it's completely free. So I'm just going to scroll down here, click on the textures, and these are all going to be super realistic textures that you have right here. I'm just going to grab a simple one like this rusty metal right here. And what you want to do is you simply just click download in the top right. Now anyways, once you download it, you're going to see this file right here. It should be zipped when you get it, but you can easily extract it. And I already extracted right here, rusty metal. And there's going to be a Blender file right here. If you'd like to open that and test that out on your own, you can feel free to do that. But we're here for the textures folder. Now inside of here, you're going to see a few different folders. You have the diff or the difference, you have the displacement, image, and you have the normals here and the roughness right here. Now these two files are unusable inside of Roblox Studio. So if you go back to Polyhaven, and if you click on these three little dashes right here, or these three little, I guess, lines up here, you'll notice you have the rough or the metal right here, and you can download this as a PNG. It should open up right here, and you just have to right click and click on save image as, and then save it wherever you'd like to, preferably in the texture folder. Now after that, you're simply going to do the same thing for the normal and the rough. So let's download the normal and the rough. So now inside my textures folder right here, you'll see that I have the normal, the arm, or I believe this is the metal. You have the diff or the color. You have the displacement, which we're actually not going to need, so you can feel free to delete this one. I'm also going to delete the two .exr files because those ones are useless, and we have our rough image. So these are the only four that we're going to be needing. And let's go back to Roblox Studio. So now inside of Roblox Studio, you just want to go right over to Material Service right here, click on the plus icon and insert a material variant. And inside of here, you can name it whatever you want to. For me, this is the rusty metal texture, so I'm going to name it rusty metal. And then you can choose a base material for it. Since it is metal, I'm going to choose the base material to be metal. Actually, I'll just leave it on smooth plastic for now. And let's go ahead and assign the material variant to our spawn location here, just so that you guys can kind of see what it'll look like as we're going through. Let's go to rusty metal. So now we have this on rusty metal. I'm just going to delete the decal inside of our spawn location so you can see it easier. Now back to our rusty metal material variant right here. We want to go to the color map, and keep in mind you do need to save your game to Roblox first, but once you go ahead and do that, you should be able to go ahead and click on this. You're going to click on add image. After this thing comes up, you just click on choose file, and once again go over to your textures folder. So for this one, you're going to find the folder called diff and open that one up. You can see it right here, and after creating it, you can see that the color map is now this Roblox asset ID, which is pretty cool. And now you go through and do the same for the rest of them. For the metalness, this is one that's going to be the arm texture. You can see that this looks much more metallic now. For the normal map, you just simply go ahead and do the Nor GL one. Now you'll see it doesn't look as metallic now, but it's definitely still looking pretty good. And once it's loading, it's now much more metallic. And then for the roughness map, you simply go through and do the rough one. Now, if you did everything correctly, you should have your very own texture right here that looks very realistic, and you can use it however you would like to. Alrighty, so there are also a few other things I want to show you guys, and this is particles. Now, I've just got this campfire right here that I added from the toolbox. And I want to show you guys just a few different things you can do with particles. So if you add in a part right here, you have the plus icon to the right of that. If you click on that, you can add in a particle emitter. Now this will emit certain particles, and you can feel free to edit any of the settings inside of here. But this can be really useful for when you're creating any sort of particle effect, whether you want that to be leaves falling from trees, leaves floating through the air, snow falling, even if you want it to be dust flying around a room if you'd like to. A really easy way to do that is just to change the size down to something like 0.1. And that kind of looks like dust. And then you simply just change the speed down to something like 1 or so, and then you just simply change the rate down, and you have yourself a pretty cool dust particle here. You can even change the spread angle so it goes in different directions if you'd like to, and you have yourself a very simple dust particle. Another few things you can do is you can add something called fire into your part if you'd like to have fire somewhere, which is pretty cool. You can have a fire. You can also add something called smoke, which is pretty cool. That's what this campfire uses. You can mess around with the settings inside of here as well. So ultimately, use particles, use lighting, use whatever you can to create more of a visual environment, I guess. That leads into the environmental storytelling I was talking about in the first video. Make your environment around you tell a story. Make it alive. And that's about all I have to say for this episode of How to Make a Horror Game. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial just as much as I did, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below. Next episode, we're going to be getting into player functionalities such as flashlights, such as interacting with objects, and even changing the sounds of our footsteps, which will be pretty cool. So make sure you stick around for that, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.